Hello, this is Kim. Before we get started, I just wanted to say we do have a trigger warning in this. Drea brings it up before we start, but it has to do with some sexual molestation and deviant sexual behavior directed toward children. We don't get too deep into it, but that is coming up. But we'll let you know ahead of time. Also, we say in this that we'll see you in 2 weeks, but we are going to go on a little hiatus or at least a break. We'll release the next episode a month from now. A lot of it has to do with the holidays and things that we have going on. So, anyway, hope you enjoy the show. Thank you. Hello, this is Kim.
This is Drea.
And this is Father Knows Death podcast. So what are we talking about today, Drea?
We're talking about the disappearance of Ray Gricar.
Right. So Ray Gricar was the district attorney for Center County, Pennsylvania. He had moved there in 1985, or 1980. He had moved there in 1980 from Ohio, where he was from. His wife had gotten a position at Penn State, which was in Center County. His plan was to be a stay-at-home dad, but the prosecuting attorney, or the district attorney, I'm going to get those messed up for the entire show, approached him and said, "Would you like to be the assistant? I need some help." So he took on the assistant district attorney job. His friend, who then left, Ray ran for district attorney and won in 1985 and was the district attorney for Center County. He announced in January 2004, that he was not going to seek re-election, that the year 2005 would be his last year, and then he was going to retire. He was going to be 60 at that point and had planned on retiring. So a little bit about Center County. I lived in Center County, Pennsylvania for a while. It's basically, I've heard people discuss and say Pennsylvania is Philadelphia on one end, Philadelphia on one end, Pittsburgh on the other end, and Alabama in the middle. And I think that's why you see it go red and blue so often back and forth. Is Central PA is a lot of rural communities, and Center is like that, except for Penn State. Pennsylvania State University is located there, one of the biggest universities in America, one of the most prestigious football programs, college football programs, up to a point. There's a lot of things that happened post Ray Gricar's disappearance and was happening before. We'll get into all that. And I was surprised to learn that before Ray got there and during Ray's early part, it was a part-time job. Did you see that? And he petitioned for it to be full-time. I would gather just from having a lot of college kids in your community, there would be a lot of drunk driving and public intox and a lot of things like that. Anyway, so he worked for Center County, Pennsylvania as the district attorney, county seat Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, where he lived at. On the day of April 15th, 2005, it was a Friday, Ray contacted his live-in girlfriend at the time, Patty Fornicola. Is that her name, Patty? Said he had taken the day off work and he was going to go out. He was going to drive over and look at some antiques in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania.
So that was a pretty warm day, apparently, in April. It was beautiful. And Ray Gricar loved antiquing. That was something that he enjoyed doing and was looking forward to doing in retirement.
I read that he collected antique cameras and also antique toys.
Mm-hmm.
And
so this is at 11:30, and he's calling to say, "Hey, I'm doing this. I won't be back in time to feed our dog." And Lewisburg was about an hour away from his home.
Bellefonte.
To me, that seems like a lot of hours you're planning on antiquing to not be home at 5:30, but that may have been perfectly usual. To me,
right.
Spending hours doing that sounds like 4 more hours than I would like to spend antiquing. But, and so Patty gets home from work. She also worked at the county courthouse with Ray. And she gets home. He's not home yet. She goes to the gym. She comes back. He's not home yet. And at this point, it's about 6:30 p.m. and she's starting to get worried.
Mm-hmm.
And she starts calling his cell phone and it's going immediately to voicemail. And so she starts just...
Which, as an aside, if that ever happens, something's wrong. You know what I mean? It went to his voicemail 5 or 6 times and then he called me back.
Well,
maybe 2005 was different.
That's, there are those weirdos out there that actually turn their cell phones like off.
Are there?
Yeah, I mean, especially in 2005 and an older person. Again, I think it's weird to us.
Yeah.
But that was his like work phone.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he used it for everything, but it was a work phone. So, I think she was thinking maybe he turned it off at some point and just forgot to turn it back on.
Well, it was found off when they did eventually find it. So he had turned it off.
So, but she keeps making calls. Nothing. He was an hour away. I'm sure she's thinking he's been in a car wreck trying to, getting home.
Again, that's a rural area. And when you drove back from Lewisburg to Bellefonte, both small towns, you're driving in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. So I would think that would be her thought. By 11:30, she's starting to panic. She calls a officer that she knows.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turns out, this is the first weekend of fishing season in
Center County.
Center County. I didn't even know fishing had a season. I realized there's like deer and duck, but I didn't realize fishing was a season.
I think they have seasons for like salmon and that kind of stuff.
I didn't know that. Yeah. So, but most of, apparently, the law enforcement of Center County was at this fishing camp, and they were drunk by 11:30 on this night and having a raucous good time. And Patty calls one of the officers and he tells everybody to shut up for a minute and tells her to call 911. Then he and the other officers start joking about how Ray was probably off with another woman and he's going to catch hell the next day.
Yeah.
And
which
so,
I don't know if it's indicative of Ray or that
we
crew.
Talked about this.
Yeah.
Is this because they know that Ray is the kind of guy who might do that? Or is this just what guys go to when they're drunk and they're a bunch of guys together?
I think the latter.
I mean, I couldn't really find anything that made me think that this was an aspersion on Ray's character specifically. So, but Patty does immediately call 911. And the next day, they start looking for Ray in earnest. It said that the officer, Daryl Zagagny, became the lead investigator because he was the first one at work that next Saturday morning. Yeah. I don't know if that's true, but there you go. Officer Zagagny and I kind of got off on the wrong foot because he was quoted saying the following, that they should have given Gricar 24 hours of being missing before starting to look for him. But Zagagny said, when you hold an office like that, I don't care what anybody says, you get a little more favored treatment than Susie Homewife, who doesn't come home tonight. Which just makes him sound like a misogynistic little prick, honestly.
I would agree, yeah.
But be that as it may.
If I were in a position of authority, or not even that, if I was a district attorney for a county, I wouldn't want the responding officer go, give him 24 hours. He's probably off gallivanting. I would want them to take it more serious. If I was going to get preferential treatment, I would rather them start looking earlier. Right? I think that speaks more to Officer Zagagny than anybody.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he said his first thought was that Gricar had met a woman in Lewisburg and ended up spending the night with her. Again, if that comes from that drunk conversation the officers were having the night before, it kind of seems like it.
Yeah.
Again, nowhere could I really find evidence that people really thought that Ray was the kind of person to just take off with some other woman.
Yeah, I didn't see anything
people
like that.
Described him as having a very good relationship with Patty, that he loved her, that they had a very stable and loving relationship.
Yeah.
So it's now April 16th.
Yeah.
And that evening, about 6:30 p.m., they find Gricar's Mini Cooper in the parking lot of an antique store in Lewisburg. And Mini Coopers, I mean, now, like, you see them, but you don't think about this, but in 2005, they were a rarity.
What, there was like 4 registered in the state at that point?
Yeah,
So,
3 or 4.
It was a unique car, very unique car at the time. Yeah. So the sightings, people said that they saw him in that Mini Cooper. It's a little bit more credence, you know?
Right. Versus driving just a regular car. Yeah, people noticed the car.
And we'll get to those
more
sightings
than the guy.
Yeah.
So they find the car. The car is locked. The car has a layer of dust on it. Or I'm imagining it's April in Arkansas. It would be yellow pollen. They called it dust.
Yeah.
But here you would be coated with pollen that time of year. Outside the car, they have no shoe prints, no tire tracks, nothing. Now,
nothing seems weird at the
nothing
scene.
seems weird. There's no blood. There's no, I mean, just
shell casing.
Yeah, exactly.
Nothing.
Now, the police officers keep stuff in their cars to unlock cars, but it apparently nothing they carried would unlock this Mini Cooper. Just though I don't understand cars enough to know, but they couldn't jimmy it open the way that they do with other cars. So they can see his cell phone inside. You see that. They can see, so they're examining the outside of the car until they can get somebody there to tow the car to the police barracks.
Right.
So they do that. They have the tow guy put on gloves, latex gloves, so already they are treating it as this could be a crime scene. And they're assuming that something could have gone wrong here. And so they take it to the police barracks. They print the outside. They do find prints on the driver's window and the door, but those would all turn out to be Ray's or Patty's or Ray's secretary. They get a guy from the Lock and Key in Lewisburg to come open the car, and there's some kind of hydraulic thing that he had to use. He was like, oh yeah, one of these cars, you got to use this hydraulic thing to pop the door open.
Okay.
But he knew how to do it, and he got the car open for them. They printed the inside, didn't find anything on the inside except there was a water bottle and there was a smudged print that wasn't usable.
Right. And I heard they ran DNA on that. It was Ray's DNA, so it was just a water bottle he had in the car drinking out of.
So now we kind of come to, I feel like in all investigations, there's stuff mentioned that it's like, is this really a true thing or not? Because it was reported in the press that the car smelled of smoke and there was ash on the passenger side, like the floor mat. But and Ray didn't smoke, apparently hated smoking, so the intimation was that somebody else was in his car.
And I've also read that
smoking.
There is a website you can go to and get some of the police reports, but it's behind a paywall. But someone I was reading said they saw it, and the police report does not mention ash in the car.
Yeah, so
I don't know
where
if that's
this came
hoax,
from.
what's not a hoax, but a rumor. I don't know.
Right, and so the guy who actually opened the car from the Lock and Key place, he said it smelled like a new car which it was a new car. So he was the first one in, and he wasn't like, oh, it reeked of smoke or anything.
Right. So you're already getting conflicting reports that there was ash in the car and it smelled of smoke. There was no ash in the car and it smelled like a new car.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Now, apparently, at that initial scene where the police were there examining the outside of the car, several bystanders, because this attracted a crowd pretty quickly. Nothing happens, I don't think, in Lewisburg besides antiquing. So
yes, it's a quaint little beautiful town. So right on the Susquehanna River.
Right. So several of the bystanders there said that police were floating that woman theory. And so the question is, were they floating it because there was any credence to it at all, or just because this spurious rumor started around a campfire the night before? But there were a couple of bystanders that said they heard police kind of making intimations about that. They didn't find much of interest in the car, like usual stuff.
Well, there were, me and you talked about this, there were Listerine breath things that you lay on your tongue that kind of dissolve. There were breath mints, and there was gum. Yeah, all in the center console. So I don't know if this dude had horrendous breath. God love him. I'm not making fun of him. Well, or if that was just things like, did he have one or two mints? And but that struck out. We both listened to this independently, and we both later said, wasn't that odd that he had so many anti-bad breath things?
Yeah, I think it's odd. Again, to go back, the only thing that I could figure out is if you're a smoker who's trying to hide the fact that you're a smoker, then you might do that. But from whom? I mean, I couldn't get very far with that.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing, even though it seems weird to me, that this was probably just normal for Ray.
Yeah, who knows what other humans do.
Right. Yeah. I know. We all have our weird little things that other people, if they were to dissect our lives, would think, that's really odd.
Yeah.
And we're just like, it seems fine with
me. He may have been experimenting which one works best, and he had all of them there, but.
So they found change. They found 2 umbrellas. They found a charging cord. They found a black t-shirt that said Pennsylvania Homicide Investigators Association. They found antique shop brochures, a roadside assistance kit. What they did not find was his laptop, which was not at home or at work and not in this car. They did not find his keys, and they did not find his wallet.
Right. Which, I guess if you get out of your car, I think in 2022, when we're recording this, you would carry your phone, but maybe not in 2005, but you would take your keys and wallet.
Yeah.
Which seems like...
But you wouldn't take your laptop to go antiquing.
No. That's the one that's weird, is it becomes less weird later, but yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the cell phone, I mean, again, to us, we would think you would never purposefully leave your cell phone in your car, but in 2005, if you're a 60-year-old dude, and
who took the day off work?
Even
though that's his work cell phone, so he didn't have, like, anybody I know that has a work cell phone has a regular cell phone today. Yeah. So, but he didn't have.
He didn't.
I don't know if even I had a cell phone in 2005, like a personal cell phone. That was around the time.
I got one for work. It wasn't a work cell phone, but that's the reason I got one, was so that they could reach me on my day
I think that was about the time people were transitioning to having cell phones.
Yeah.
I remember when I got one, I called somebody from the car, as I was driving, and they're like, "Are you still such and such?" Like, "No, I'm in the car." And they're like, "What?" Yeah. So.
Oh, entered another age. So, about the prints, again, there's been some discussion about, because they didn't find any prints in the car, that it was wiped.
Yeah.
I looked up a manual for law enforcement officers on processing vehicles for forensic evidence, and they basically said, because of the rough surfaces in the interior of the car, that they're typically, the plastics and the fabric, good luck. You should check the seatbelt buckle, like the actual...
Where you push the button to get out?
Well, the actual shiny part, like the metal and the interior window surfaces.
Mm-hmm.
But, they said, you should try this stuff where it makes sense, but don't be surprised.
So
if you
what
don't
you're
find
saying
anything.
is they just didn't find prints because that's normal
That
on the surface of
seems
the car,
normal.
as opposed to they didn't find prints
Intentionally
because
wiped.
someone wiped everything
That's
down.
what I'm saying.
Correct.
People think that fingerprints, like if you just touch anything, there's a fingerprint there, but it depends a lot on what surface you're touching and a lot of other things. This is a whole science. So at this point, they've got the car, they go through it with a fine-toothed comb.
The car, by and large, doesn't offer up any evidence.
No.
I think, was there ash in there? Was there not? Did it smell like smoke? Did it not? Until we can find something definitive, and I can't, I think that's just a wash.
Yeah.
One thing they did discover at the scene, not necessarily in the car, was when they brought those police dogs.
Yeah.
The police dog indicated that he caught a scent, Ray's scent, getting out of the car, and tracked it not very far, like feet, before he lost the scent. And they circled and circled and widened that circle and never picked it up. And the handler said, to me, this indicates Ray got into another car.
Yeah, I don't know what to think about that. In that, I mean, he was supposedly seen in the antique shop that day. So he's near, it's called the Street of Shops, and you can Google map it.
Yeah.
The Street of Shops, Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. And he was supposedly seen in there. He was seen at 2 other places around town, like within blocks of the antique stores that day. So the fact that the dog couldn't find, like, we know he was other places within blocks. The fact that they couldn't find his scent anywhere, even with a widening circle, seems like maybe the dog was having an off day.
Well, it depends on how far they widened it. If they widened it to a point where it would have contacted another one, yes.
But they knew that they had him in the shops that day.
So he did walk from his car to the shop, and the dog didn't catch that.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just wasn't sure how reliable that was, because the dog didn't find in other places, and I'm sure their ability to detect is.
And again, with the handler was the one that said, I think he got into another car. Maybe the handler, they had ruled out, like the dog tracked him into his shop, and they're like, this doesn't count. We don't know the specifics.
I couldn't find a lot of specifics on the dog. I couldn't find exactly when the dog was even there.
Yeah.
So, I'm not sure. Nobody else on the police side of things has come out and said, we think he got into another car.
Right. Yeah, that's not a theory that we know of that the police are working. However, the K9 unit handler said, I think he got into another car.
So...
And when did all this happen? What time frame was this happening? Around 3 in the afternoon?
No, this was like 6:30 p.m. So it was getting dark when the police...
I'm sorry. When Ray was in those stores, when he was sighted by patrons and they knew he was there. I think that's around 3 or so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because what makes that weird is someone said, I was at Lewisburg in that time, and I saw Ray Gricar around 5 o'clock at an intersection, not there. And then they said that somebody in this car. So it was, again, this car that was so unique. And when they showed a picture, he's like, that's who it was. That's who that guy was. Which messes up the time frame, because it looks like he parked at the shops around 3 and didn't leave. But someone has him somewhere else at 5.
Near the courthouse, near work,
yeah,
right?
I'm sorry, right. So
an hour away. That seems to have been wrong.
That's what it comes down to. But again, the guy's like, it was that car. I mean, that car stood out.
He must have had his day wrong or something, because...
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, they did try to figure out how that was possible, and they just couldn't really make that work.
Yeah.
So they don't think that he was back in Bellefonte, and then his car ended up back in Lewisburg. That didn't seem to have happened.
So oddly enough, right now at this point, and we've been talking for 20 minutes, there may or may not have been someone else there with him. There may or may not have been someone in the car. There may or may not have been ashes in the car, a smoker in the car. He got into another car. Everything is still maybe. And I think that was a prevailing attitude of what was going on at the time. People were, even the cops were like, well, he may have, and I don't know why. Was it because it was a small town? Because I've heard that Bellefonte police officers were on the case, but this was an hour away from Bellefonte. It was still Center County.
It was outside.
Oh, it was Union County.
It was Union County. And it seemed like pretty quickly Union County was like, this is your DA, have at it.
But that seems weird. I mean, it
seemed like a professional courtesy. And also, like, we don't want to spend our taxpayer money on paying overtime for our little police force to look for your DA.
Yeah.
So, your taxpayers are more likely to be okay with putting a lot of resources into this.
That seems weird. I mean, where do you draw the line? Somebody's like, oh, this person lived in Bellefonte, so you should take over? No, they would obviously...
Right.
So that seemed weird to me that Bellefonte Police Department was handling a case of somebody that was found in another town in another county. Was that part of the reason some of this was some maybes going on? Because it was just so small? They didn't have anything definitive from what I can gather.
Yeah. But, would some bigger police force have done better? I don't know. They seemed to process what they had pretty thoroughly. It's just... they didn't have much.
Possibly.
And they didn't have anything more until July 30th, 2005. So this was from April 16th. They've got the car. And then, they go over his financial records. They go over everything. They don't find anything out of the ordinary.
What's weird I heard about the financial records is they said he had less money than they expected. But other people said he lived a fairly nominal, not poor, but, basic lifestyle. And he had paid cash for that Mini Cooper. He had paid cash for that car. So maybe he didn't have a lot of money because he just was one of these people that didn't.
He had 2 ex-wives. I don't know how that goes into it.
Part of it. And also, I don't know if you wanted to harken back to this later, but some of the people at the scene said there was a woman with him at that antique mall when he was walking around. Some say he just ran into her there and they were talking about a shared interest in antiques and he wasn't with her. Others were like, they seemed to be together. Others said they didn't see him with a woman. So
yeah, there's a lot of that eyewitness testimony that who knows,
right?
So April 16th, they've got the car. They don't find anything else of interest until July 30th when fishermen find the laptop in the Susquehanna River. It's under a bridge and it's in the kind of muck and mud there on the banks. The hard drive was missing. Like the hard drive had been physically removed, not by the river.
Right. You had to take it has to be screwed out. There's screws that hold it in and they were missing. Yeah.
And then September, so another month or so after that, someone finds a hard drive on the banks of the same river, about 100 yards from the location of the laptop. Mm-hmm. They're assuming that it's his hard drive. How many laptops are being dumped in this section of the river, we don't know. Mm-hmm. Presumably it's his. Mm-hmm. But the FBI, the U.S. Secret Service, a data recovery firm tried to get information off the hard drive and failed to get anything.
And it should be noted, too, they were found in areas that were accessible to walkers. It looked as if you just walked down to the edge and threw it in.
Plunk it in.
So that says something as well.
Yes. So the other thing, eventually this was years before they kind of made this public, but they did eventually make the Bellefonte police said that on Gricar's home computer, there were internet searches on topics such as how to wreck a hard drive, how to fry a hard drive, and water damage to a notebook computer.
Mm-hmm.
Some people were saying, well, he was about to retire. Maybe he wanted his personal information like off the laptop. But if
it's the water one that
it's
gets
the
me.
water one.
Yeah.
And how to fry a hard drive. If I just want my personal information off a computer, that's not the search that I would be, typing.
Yeah.
So
I don't believe that. There's something more not nefarious, suspicious.
Yes.
With you searching how to destroy a hard drive. He was wanting to destroy a hard drive.
Yes. And he did. He did a
did.
good enough job that the FBI couldn't get a darn thing off of it.
Yeah.
Even with it being found.
Which that is weird. I mean, that adds a whole new wrinkle to this case, that he looked for a way to destroy a hard drive. Apparently the water one was the one that he went, yeah, that seems the best. Mm-hmm. Physically removed the hard drive. Mm-hmm. Then, I guess for safety's sake, he just said, fuck, I'm throwing the laptop in too. Threw the laptop in, and then threw the hard drive in. Mm-hmm. And it would be almost impossible coincidence that he was looking for this, searching for this information, and someone else did it. In other words, it seems Ray Gricar was the one that threw this laptop in the river.
Right. Either that is an astounding coincidence, or Ray Gricar was looking to destroy this hard drive for whatever reason.
Right.
And did so.
Yeah.
And, that's really it as far as they never found him.
Yeah.
They never found his wallet or
Nothing
his
has been
keys.
found.
They never found blood anywhere. So now we come to really the theories. The first theory, suicide.
Right. His brother had committed suicide 9 years earlier.
8 years. It was,
And his brother had parked near a river and walked to the river and thrown himself in. And Ray's car was found at that shop in that street of shops, but that was near the banks of the Susquehanna. He had parked in the same.
If you Google map this, you can see just the river is right there. And it was actually Ray's nephew who was at the scene where the car was found, who looked at the car and the river and said something to officers about how reminiscent. Yes, this is reminiscent of my dad's suicide. Yeah. Now, people say, people said a few things. One, that he would never, because of the toll that his brother's suicide took on his nephews, and that he would never do that to his daughter. He had an adult daughter, Laura, who he was looking forward to visiting in Washington State after retirement. He would be able to see her more. So people said
he had no history of this kind of activity. In other words, no depression. He didn't have any mental health issues, as far as known mental health issues where he was going to a mental health professional for treatment. Nothing like that. His friends say he didn't seem to suffer from that.
Rebuttal.
Right, I know.
So, yeah, and I looked it up. The statistic that I found was that 25 to 30% of people who commit suicide had contact with psychiatric clinicians within a year of their death.
Which means 60-something didn't.
A lot didn't. Yeah. And although everybody that knew him described him as kind and a good guy, and people have very positive things to say about him, but pretty uniformly people said, but I didn't know him that well. He was hard to get to know. Very private person. He was intensely private. So if he had struggles with depression, I think it is very likely that nobody knew that. That
probably.
He kept it to himself.
But it is worth saying that. But
he didn't.
He didn't.
He wasn't on
anybody,
meds.
right?
He wasn't seeing a psychiatrist. Nothing like that. people said, well, he had future plans. He was looking forward to retirement. He had searched for airline tickets to go visit his daughter. You know, it's not a suicide because he had future plans. That actually doesn't necessarily mean, you know, it can go either way. That's not an indication that it's definitely not a suicide. It was close to the anniversary of his brother's death. So his brother had committed suicide in May, and this was mid-April. And, you know, anniversaries of things are typically tough.
But
for people.
Yeah, but it wasn't the anniversary. You know, it's close. If this had happened on the day his brother had died, it'd been a lot more feasible.
Yeah.
But here's my biggest thing about the suicide.
Yeah.
They haven't found the body. It's impossible. It's near impossible to murder someone and hide the body so well that they can't be found. And they never found the body. I looked, the Susquehanna at Lewisburg that day was around 8 feet, which is deep enough to drown in easily. But it's not a raging river that's pulling people away. Right.
So he would have... So the bridge that's there, if he had jumped off the bridge, from what I saw, the consensus seems to be he would have broken both his legs and not drowned.
Right.
But if he did a Virginia Woolf, or just walked into the river, the currents are very fast, even though it's not very deep. And you definitely could drown in there if you had wanted to. This
is also a spot where people went. Some grown man walking into the water to kill himself at 3 p.m.
I agree.
Would have been seen. I mean, people saw him all day. He was in this place. He was in this place. And then we're going to say he either walked in or jumped.
I agree.
And they didn't find the body. And I know someone has. I think you said something about there were some lock and dams down the river, and if he got caught in that,
there are ways that he could have gotten caught up in brush piles or dams and not been found. I agree. It's weird.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's weird.
That's the biggest reason I don't think it was suicide, is because they didn't find the body.
And I think the thing that goes for it most is that everything else is even weirder.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what suicide has as a theory, is that everything else you have to stretch even more.
Right. So we'll go into everything else. And I think you people say there's 3, but there's 4 theories that could have happened. So the next after suicide would be he walked away. He just didn't want this life anymore.
Yeah.
And he left.
So
a lot of things that go in with suicide fall into that. Was he going to leave his family, the people that he loved, in this sort of limbo of not knowing what happened to him? Would he have just left? Now he did. Was it Slovenia his family lived, and he was fluent in Slovenia, and he had visited there, and people said if he wanted to, on a plane and go there, and he's fine.
But they never found. It's not easy to necessarily travel countries without being found.
Yeah.
And they did look. They have checked out that connection. They never found any evidence of that. So would he have left his adult daughter, especially?
Who, by all accounts, he was very close to.
Yes, very close.
Like, what was it? He wouldn't. If someone called the office and they said it was his daughter, he said, wherever I'm at, whatever I'm doing.
Literally, if I'm in trial,
which he was,
you better pass me a note and tell me my
daughter's on the phone. One of the bailiffs said your daughter called, and he told the judge, I want a recess to go talk to his daughter. So he was very close. And it seems, which suicide and walking away without his daughter knowing both seem. And walking away from everything to start a new life is very movie, TV. I don't know how many people in real life do it and are successful at doing it.
Yeah, given how established he was, and he could have, like, if he had wanted out of this life, well, he could have. He wasn't married to Patty.
He had already said he was retiring.
He's already been divorced twice. It's not like he couldn't get out of this one if he wanted out. This one would have been easier. They weren't married.
Yeah.
They didn't find enough money missing to make them think that he had been squirreling away.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed to me like a lot of his money was in this pension that he was going to get, which now he's not going to get if he
Right.
leaves.
I don't
start
think that
a new
happened.
life.
That's
So-
the one that seems least like. Well, the other one is he died of natural causes and fell off a bridge, or he died of natural causes in the woods and they just haven't found him.
I mean, I'm putting that on my list because, again,
It's weird.
it's weird, but weird stuff happens, and it would explain, everything except the laptop.
Yeah.
Because you don't, I mean, to be destroying a laptop and have an aneurysm seems like kind of one heck of a day.
Yeah.
But maybe. So the things that go through for that, he wanted to start a new life. That theory.
Mm-hmm.
He had allegedly expressed interest in the case of a Cleveland police chief who had done that. And after his disappearance, there were multiple, over 300 reported sightings of him. I mean, and they came down to nothing. One of the most credible was at a bar
in Wilkes-Barre.
Yeah, that a
Which
bartender and an off-duty police officer said he was watching a baseball game.
Mm-hmm. He was a big baseball fan.
And he was a baseball fan.
He had gone back to Cleveland to watch the Indians a few times.
But even that,
right.
There's nowhere on any CCTV camera or anywhere was there.
And I'll say this too: if you look at a picture, if you're thinking right now you've never seen Ray Gricar, think of a man who's 59 years old, a professional who works as a district attorney. Picture that in your mind.
Yeah.
That's what he looks like.
Exactly.
And I'm not saying that in a mean way, but he had a
no.
very non-unique look.
Yeah.
He just looked like a normal guy.
A 59-year-old white guy.
Yeah. Who had that receding hairline and kind of the comb over and just a nice smile and just normal average weight and build. So to say I saw him is like, there was a guy that looked like that. Well, a lot of people look like
his
that.
car was definitely more distinctive looking than he was. So unless you personally knew him, I'm not sure how you're telling him from any of these other white dudes out there.
Yeah.
So that's the starting a new life. Again, to me, seems the least.
Yeah.
I agree. Seems the least credible.
Yeah.
Now, homicide.
Right. And I think that's. The police seem to have gone suicide fairly quickly, but I think the rest of the world who likes conspiracies and cool shit and whatever, something nefarious happened to Ray that day.
Yeah, and so there were a few. I mean, obviously, the DA, being the DA, comes with a certain amount of risk, and you're prosecuting some fairly unpleasant people a lot of times.
And there was a guy in prison who said, "When I get out, I'm going to kill that son of a bitch," who had gotten out.
And there was
Hell's Angels
busted a heroin dealing ring. There had been an assistant U.S. attorney, Jonathan Luna, who was killed in December 2003, and they thought he might be connected. But these things kind of came to nothing. Like, they kind of looked into it and didn't really find anything.
And I think the biggest one.
So, and at
that
this
you
point,
hear a lot about.
I'm going to say, before we start this, that this is a trigger warning.
Yes.
That we are going to discuss, not in a lot of detail, but the case of Jerry Sandusky and the sexual abuse of children. So, if you don't want to hear about this, and I don't blame you, you just fast forward a little bit.
Yeah. We'll try to say when we're done with it, and hopefully you can catch it after your fast forward. But and again, we're not going to get into detail.
No.
But Jerry Sandusky was an assistant coach. He was a defensive coordinator for Penn State. And again, Penn State's football was a big deal. They had won multiple national championships. Their coach was Joe Paterno, who came there in 1967 and left 2011-ish, somewhere in there, was there forever. Joe Pa was part of college football, and his assistant coach, who had been his assistant coach since like 69, the guy had been there, Sandusky had been there for almost as long as Joe Pa had been there, was molesting children. He had started a charity called the Second Mile Foundation, and it was mainly for underprivileged children that he would bring into this coaching camp and teach them how to play football. But as a lot of predators, he could see people that were weak. He could see these young men who didn't have fathers and were dependent on other people to help them. And he saw them as prey. And he was sexually molesting them. Like, he would force them to take showers with him and then whatever. This was happening for a long time at Penn State.
Yeah, we don't know exactly how long, but one would suspect...
Yeah.
Very shortly after Sandusky got there, probably.
Right, yeah. And the theory is that Ray knew about this. I think it's more than theory. I think he knew about it, but it has come out that he knew that this was going on.
Yeah, he definitely did. In 1998, a mother came forward and said that her 11-year-old son had showered with Sandusky. The 11-year-old told this to his psychologist, and the psychologist said, you need to call the Penn State police office. It got to Gricar, and they did. They had kind of a sting operation where they had the mother invite.
Mothers.
Well, they had.
Well, no, yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
They had the mother invite Sandusky over to her home to explain what had happened, and they had police officers there. He gave very vague, I mean, he didn't say anything that was really incriminating.
Yeah.
You know, he apologized. He was
I wasn't trying to hurt this young man. The water was just warm. I knew it was cold.
He had a lot of excuses. Yeah. So he didn't really admit to anything, even though it seems like Gricar thought that he was a criminal, that he didn't think he could prove it. And they were not helped. There was another guy who kind of investigated this and found that everything was basically unfounded. And
yeah, but there is a lot of people at Penn State University in the 90s that if that had come out, it would have crushed the football program, which would have crushed Penn State, which would have crushed Central Pennsylvania. I mean, that's how big the football program was at Penn State. So I think even now the prevailing wisdom was, for a long time, people hid this because we can't let this get out.
Oh yeah, they definitely were hiding it. And
when Sandusky was eventually convicted of 45 counts of, run the gamut from, I think, sexual abuse to rape, and I don't know, he took some people down with him that said he was.
And there were a
helping.
lot of other people who should have probably gone down that didn't.
Joe Paterno caught public flack for it, but he claimed he didn't know what was going on, and people were like, how can you be the head coach of the fucking football program and not know that children are being raped in your locker rooms for 20, 30 years?
When this was becoming kind of, talk about town at some point, it was discussed in the community that this was happening after it happened to a lot of kids. And Gricar was described as a very good prosecutor and a very thorough prosecutor, but also cautious, that he wasn't going to go after Sandusky unless he was 100% sure he could take him down. Yeah. And that, because definitely the question is, why didn't Sandusky go down in 1998? Why did it take the abuse of so many more kids? And what is it, 2011 that he finally went down? So that's 13 more years he spent abusing underprivileged kids because they decided not to make an issue of it. And so...
And it should be noted, if I remember right, it came out because one of the other assistant coaches, who was fairly young on the team, saw something happening and hadn't got the word that we don't talk about that, and went to the cops. And the cops were like, are you sure,
you really want to make this report?
And he's like, this kid, yeah. And it kind of blew up. Even at that point when it blew up, they were still trying to keep it under.
Yeah,
and the president of the university and everything was like, Coach Sandusky's been here for a long... And they tried to cover it up still until I think they finally... The dam broke and the avalanche hit and they had to...
And the free report was a big part of that. He was a former
Louis Free.
Former director of the FBI, and he was actually hired by Penn State to do a report on this, and he eviscerated them. I don't think they knew what they were getting when they thought, everybody else toes the line. This guy, we'll do an investigation.
He came back with...
Hoo boy.
Yeah. Well, it was that led to... Was it Spanier was the president of the university? Was fired and I think indicted on some charges. And Joe Pa wasn't indicted for some reason. I don't know, but I know there was that famous statue of Joe Pa outside the stadium of him leading players onto the field. They took that statue down. Joe Pa retired and died soon thereafter, and his entire legacy now is tainted. Rightly so. I mean, I was a fan of Penn State football because it just, if you don't know anything about college football, Penn State was one of those institutions that they were like old school. They didn't have their names on the uniforms, and their uniforms hadn't changed in years, and they were, that very traditional football of Joe Pa was this guy that was this father figure and led these men, and you know what I mean? It had that persona about it, and I was always a big fan of that. They weren't my favorite team, but I always had a respect for Penn State because they had this attitude of being this traditional football powerhouse. And it took even me, I was like, God, did Joe Pa know about this? And after a while you go, he had to. People in town knew about it. It was being whispered in town in the 90s and early 2000s that something's going on. And so Joe Pa was harboring this child molester.
And if you are interested in learning more about that horrible case, the free report is a good place to. He's got a great timeline, and everything is very succinctly, like you can get a lot of information.
It's FREEH.
Yes, FREEH report. So Gricar, back to 1998. Doesn't think he's got enough on Sandusky. There was a quote by, and this was an unnamed friend / prosecutor in the thing that where I read it, that they went out to lunch, and this was in 2004, so a year before Gricar disappeared, and they were out on the street after lunch, and they saw Sandusky, and he said, "Do you know who that is? That's Jerry Sandusky, the coach, and he's a goddamn pedophile, and I'm going to put him away if it's the last thing I do."
Yeah.
So we have a couple of, everybody says that Gricar was a good guy. And there are really, you can read statements from friends about not just that he said the right things, but that he went out of his way to do the right thing.
Well, his daughter was adopted. They had adopted a daughter, which, in and of itself, I think speaks highly of someone. One reason he left that note and called his girlfriend about the dog is the dog was old and had special care, and it wasn't like, I can't come home and feed the dog. It's, we need to make sure she gets fed, and that was the emphasis of the call or the note, was this dog. And people's like, who does? That's not something a lot of people would do. And there's those maybe just small examples, but there are more things of Gricar being a good guy.
And in his work, that he really cared about the victims that he was representing. He never had political aspirations. He wasn't in the DA's office so that he could take the next step or climb a ladder like a lot of people. Like, he really cared about his work.
Well, I'd read that there was no strong opponents to him. No one had even said they were going to run against him this next time before he declared he wasn't running. And they said he could have easily won that seat for that office.
Well liked and respected.
Yeah.
So you have this guy who's a good guy, and he's saying, this guy, I know he's a pedophile. He's abusing underprivileged children, and people are protecting him. I'm going to do something about it if it's the last thing I do. And yet 2005, he's getting ready to retire. There is no active case against Sandusky at that point. That conflict, either he's not really that good, or that has to be a conflict that weighs heavily on your conscience, that you know this is out there happening to children, and you realize that you don't have the evidence or the political capital to make it stop, and so you're just gonna retire and have it be somebody else's problem someday. I mean, I have to think that
that's a lot.
That weighs
carry.
heavily on you.
And there was no notes about this, nothing. They found nothing that Ray had investigated this anywhere in his office.
Yeah, now they don't have his laptop.
However, there could have been somewhere else.
Yeah. But there were no files in the office that he was investigating it.
Yeah.
So when people, bring up homicide, there's, the conspiracy theory seems to be that he was getting too close to prosecuting Sandusky, and so somebody who knew what was going on had him killed. Which
is a stretch, because at the end of the day, as important as we're making it out to be, it was a football program at a college. And I get you can kill somebody, but that almost seems like a movie too.
Well,
discredit the guy and do maybe this, but to murder someone because they're about to make the football program crash,
and even
it's a stretch.
I could potentially see it if he was the only person who had knowledge of this, but
right.
Everybody knew in 2005,
it was an open secret.
right?
Yeah.
Which is horrible, but true.
Yeah.
That getting rid of this one person was not going to stop anything.
Most people who have looked into this case that I've read about say the Penn State thing is a coincidence. It's very unlikely that had anything to do with it, other than what you were saying, that it was something that was on his brain, and he's like, I can't do anything about this guy, which I think leads to the suicide.
Right. So to me, it could go to suicide.
Yeah.
That this is, how do you go into a carefree retirement knowing that this is going on in your backyard?
Yeah.
But
it almost seems the opposite, that if he thought it was going on, had been looking into it, had been trying to, because some people say that he was talking to other mothers, and building a case. Why would he want to destroy that evidence? Even if it was circumstantial, especially if he thought he was going to kill himself, it would seem to be more in line with the path we're taking, that he would kill himself, and then someone finds his laptop, and oh my God, look at the evidence he was building up towards Sandusky. Yeah. That would be more of his legacy.
Mm-hmm.
To destroy that seems the exact opposite of what we're saying. And we know he did, because he's the one that searched for how to do that.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Which makes this case very weird. I mean, right now, sitting here looking over and the evidence that we've seen and the research we've done, I don't know what happened to the guy.
Yeah.
Homicide seems a stretch. You know what I mean? It just seems like a stretch. But to me, it seems most likely because we don't have a body.
Yeah, so for it to be a homicide, they either had to be meeting him there, and so he didn't really take the day off work. He was meeting. Yeah, I mean, it was for a specific purpose that he went here and met somebody, and then they got him into another vehicle and took him somewhere and killed him. They destroyed his laptop, and they just happened to do it in the same way that he had searched on his computer.
I think regardless of the path you take, he destroyed that computer.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't see any other way. That's such a specific search.
Mm-hmm.
So what? He went and destroyed his computer, and on that same day, somebody who had been following him, waiting for an opportunity, took advantage of it and just shot him. Or, I mean, can't have shot him. Again, he was in a public area, so you have to get him into a car and take him somewhere else. They didn't kill him in downtown Lewisburg.
Yeah.
So, you were saying the thing about the mothers. So there were reports that he had been sighted with a few different women in weeks or months before his death, always at antique shops.
Yeah.
That there wasn't necessarily, it wasn't like they were making out or anything. It wasn't necessarily a romantic thing. And even on that day that he went missing, they said that he was with a woman, but there wasn't the descriptions given of the women didn't match. It's not like, oh, this is clearly the same woman. They were different descriptions.
Yeah.
And whether, again, who knows? I mean, people's memories, most of them were far after the fact. He had a friend, Barbara Patino, who he had worked with professionally. She went on to become the press secretary for the Pennsylvania. She was the press secretary for Tom Corbett, who was the AG who would become governor. And he had written her a professional letter of recommendation, and they were friends.
Mm-hmm.
And her parents they sold antiques and they sold toy soldiers, which was one of the things that Gricar collected.
Yeah.
And so there was some talk at first that she might have been the woman that he was with. She was on her way to New York to like a niece's confirmation ceremony when this was going on. And she basically said, look, like, my parents are in this world. If I was at an antique shop with Ray, the dealers would know. They know me. Like, they would have said, that's Barbara that he was with.
Yeah.
It's a small community.
Yeah.
They would have recognized me if I had been there, but I wasn't.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how many of those sightings with other women are true.
Yeah.
And
that's, if he did get killed over the Sandusky case, to me, I find it more believable that a mother might have killed him than somebody on Sandusky's side killed him.
I keep reading a lot of people say, why would Penn State or the Sandusky people want to have him killed when he wasn't
doing anything? Yeah, it seems to me
leads credence to someone on the other side.
There's more motivation for a mother whose child has been sexually assaulted, and the police know about it and yet aren't going after him. To me, that seems more credible as far as a reason for homicide.
Yeah.
But again, if that happened, they were good enough to never. But again, the laptop, they said, show me something on the laptop, and then they decided to destroy the laptop in that same way.
I don't know. The laptop is very, very strange.
And that's why
it adds a new wrinkle, as I said earlier, is if that didn't exist, then I think other things become more credible. Like the murder homicide aspect becomes more credible. Yeah. But when you realize he wanted to get rid of some sort of evidence and did get rid of it and did erase it, that makes it seem something suspicious, personal to him.
And that just, again, that comes back to why suicide is kind of at the top of my list. Now, there was you would think with the laptop destroyed, was he being blackmailed over something personal? They didn't find any evidence elsewhere. Now, again, they don't have the laptop, but when they went through his financial records and everything else, they didn't find
any weirdness in his life,
blackmail or anything. But I still just think at the end of the day, because of the laptop and the suicide, that's where it kind of comes down for me. Even though I agree how somebody
at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon on a beautiful day at a place where tourists I don't know if it's necessarily touristy, but it's a place people go, committed suicide. Nobody saw
him.
And now there's been no body.
Yeah.
And if he jumped into a river and drowned.
Oh, and there were the couple other sightings around town that day, maybe. Again, it's hard to know what to make of these, but besides being sighted in the antique store, there were 2 other reported sightings of him in Lewisburg. One was outside a museum, and the employee saw the Mini Cooper, which again, that attracted attention. And then it was gone, and then 45 minutes or so later, it was back at another parking spot, and she saw Ray outside of the car, and he was pacing and talking, and she wasn't sure whether he was talking to himself or whether he was on a Bluetooth.
Yeah.
And Bluetooth was still pretty new in those days.
Mm-hmm.
So she had seen somebody use it before, so it did occur to her that that was maybe possible. She couldn't tell. And then he was gone.
Yeah.
Never came into the museum or anything. And there was a woman who owned a little shop, and he came into her shop. She tried to just say, hi, how are you, what's going on? Are you looking for anything? And he kind of put his hand up to his ear and didn't talk to her, and kind of was like, no.
Mm-hmm.
And walked to the back of her store, walked back to the front, and then left.
Mm-hmm.
And, didn't buy anything, didn't say anything.
And there was no pings to the local thing, no recorded calls from the cell phone he had.
Yeah, so if he was talking on a Bluetooth device, he was using a burner phone, which...
Burner phones were almost not a thing in 2005. Right. Having one phone was a big deal.
Right, exactly. So...
Yeah, that was weird, too. Was he talking to himself? Because I heard that, too. He was
that kind of goes to the state of mind.
What was going on in this guy's mind?
Or was he talking on a burner phone, which there's only a few reasons that I could think of that he would have a burner phone.
Yeah.
But nobody
everything to me, like you say, points to suicide. Like the incidents, well, short of the best theory, I should say. Nothing really points to suicide.
Right, that's the thing. Is
the theory, I can see it being suicide, but
they're
again,
the fewest things that point away.
Nobody saw this man in the middle of the afternoon kill himself, and nobody has ever been recovered. Yeah. Those seem weird to me.
I agree. It's weird. And there was no... I never saw anything about him having a gun or anything like that. Because the question is... people assume it's the river because it's right there and what happened to his brother. Could he have walked... he could walk into basically the wilderness.
Yeah.
Close enough from there.
But if you're going to do that, just drive there. Because, it was Lewisburg. Yeah. Lewisburg's not a big town, but it is to walk from where he was parked at to a wilderness area good enough to hide his body is a fairly good walk. You're walking for an hour or so. Just get in your car and drive. You drive for 30, 40 minutes. You're in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree.
There's a lot of, maybe he did this, but, which I guess is why we're talking about this.
Yeah.
To this day, it's still unsolved, and people don't know what happened.
He's been declared dead in 2011. His adult daughter, who is a trustee of his estate, had him declared dead. But it's still considered an open case.
Mm-hmm.
They still are looking for information.
Nothing has been solved. I looked up, as I do in a lot of these cases, right at the end of my research, developments, like 2022 is what's the newest, and nothing. Yeah. There's not even, I think one of the Pennsylvania newspapers had still an open case.
Yeah, every once in a while something will kind of come up. But, as far as, and it hits the press again in some little article, but no development.
Oh, the podcast Final Argument is where we got some of this.
Yeah, so
but we should go into it as a codicil that it's a kind of a strange podcast. I wasn't exactly overwhelmed by it.
Yeah, there's a lot. So that was Rebecca Knight did its Final Argument. It's several hours long.
I think it's 6 or 7 episodes of 30 to 45 minutes, 50 minutes each.
There were just, for me, some leaps of logic that I'm like...
Yeah, she made this podcast she already knew what had happened. I'm making air quotes, and this podcast supports her.
Yeah.
And not just...
It's like, that's possible. But just as possible are a lot of other explanations.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, there's just as much evidence that aliens abducted him as any of this other stuff.
Yeah.
So you can't really... You're not going to prove what happened to Ray Gricar. It's not provable at this point.
And late into the episodes, like episode 5, she's like, and if you go back and listen, after she tells you something, go back and listen. And I hit Easter eggs in the first couple of episodes, and you could go back and listen again and find, and I'm like, that just seems, why would you do that? That just seemed very weird that she told people to
Yeah.
Go back and listen to it again, and you'll find new information in her own podcast.
Yeah. So, I did learn some stuff from her podcast,
But some of it was absolutely wrong, too.
Yeah.
She had information that was not true in her podcast.
Yeah. So, don't use that as your only source of information, I would say.
And she interviews a woman that saw him, and the woman's like, yeah, I saw him. He was walking around. Maybe he had a headset on. Or Bluetooth. I wasn't sure, but he was pacing and seemed odd. That interview took 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And I just told you everything that they found out in that interview. So it felt to me like she was trying to pad her runtime for her podcast. And I mean, she did a lot of stuff. And if you go to, I think it's raygricar.com is her website. She has a lot of information there, and it's behind a paywall. So you have to pay $20 to look at the stuff she's got. But she is one of the foremost experts on this case, but she has already come to a conclusion that she can support.
Was not the same as my conclusion. But again, I don't really have a conclusion because you can't with the available evidence.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, this was, I do hope for his family's sake that they find something one way or the other, because God bless. I mean, he had family and friends who, to this day, if he showed back up and he'd just been disappeared, they would have been really mad for 5 minutes and then just overjoyed to see him again.
Yeah. So, but I don't think he'll ever show up. I think he was either killed or killed himself. Neither of them seem likely.
Yeah.
But both of them. One of them is.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I think that's all I got. Do you have anything else?
No, that's it.
All right. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another one. If you have any cases you like, something you want to investigate, jump on all our social media and tell us about it. But short of that, thanks for listening. Have a good night.